But in the overall thrust, we need greater guidance and leadership, in my opinion, from our executive branch. This current executive has not provided that. For example, in November, as you know, the administration had 10 enemy combatants. 5 of them I'm going to send to a domestic federal court in New York, and 5 of them are going to military commissions. It's not that these people don't have rights, and I never said that. It's just they don't have rights under domestic criminal law. If you're an enemy combatant, your rights are associated with the law of war. You have a lot of rights, but you're an illegal enemy combatant. You're not a prisoner of war, and therefore illegal enemy combatants have different sets of rights under the law of war. But we have a schizophrenic policy. You know, what's the difference? Why are 5 going to federal courts and 5 going to military commissions? That doesn't send a clear signal. And so you have that confusion amongst our people that, is this war? Is this a metaphor? What are you doing? Theoretically, the president could designate Ali Mutalib, who trained with al-Qaeda, as an enemy combatant and detain him indefinitely until the war's over. He has that authority to do that. He didn't elect to do that. Jose Padilla was identified as an enemy combatant. He was lawfully detained. But the reason we didn't try him in a military commission is because our Congress exempts U.S. citizens from trial by military commissions. And I think that's shockingly wrong. In World War II, we didn't exempt U.S. citizens that fought for Germany. We hung one of them by the neck until dead at a military commission, one of the German saboteurs. He was a U.S. citizen, and we executed him by military commission. If I was a senator, I would not exempt U.S. citizens from trial by military commission. They would be the first in line to go to a military commission. We self-imposed that rule. That's not an international rule. We self-imposed it. And that shows a lot of hypocrisy because other nations, and I've debated lawyers in Canada, they said, look, that's not fair. Our Canadian citizen is going to a military commission. How come your U.S. citizen gets to go to a federal district court? That's not fair. And I have to agree with them. Yeah, it's not fair. Is it illegal? No, I guess it's not illegal. But we don't have a clear policy, so there is a lot of confusion. But no, we are at war. It's not a metaphor. Our Congress tells us we're at war. They passed Military Commissions Act. They passed the authorization for use of military force. Our Supreme Court has never said that we're not at war. In fact, they've said they've added extra protections because this is a special new type of warfare we've never done before. And our Commander-in-Chief currently uses the war machine. He uses to detain, and he's told us that he's sending 5 of them down for trial by military commission in November. In June, he signaled he was going to do that also. So we have a confused policy. There's no doubt about it. But in the big picture, is it illegal what we're doing? No. Have we done some sloppy things? Yes. But you got to be very careful about listening to enemy combatants when they, say, well, I was beat. I've got a book I've written, and I've done some of my own studies. When we released a lot of these folks in Afghanistan, all AP reporters are all over them, and they say, how was it at Gitmo? Oh, I was tortured every day. It was horrible. One guy said I was beat with a metal rod 100 times. The reporter said, well, can you take off your robe and show me? Oh, I can't do that. A little fellow pulled the reporter off the side. He said, no, they never beat us. They interrogated us, but we were treated very well. Not all liars are murderers, but all murderers are liars. If you can murder, you can lie. In fact, the Al-Qaeda handbook tells you to lie, indicate that you're tortured. And that's what they tell them to do. So the Human Rights Commission, for example, did a study at Gitmo. 1, they said that Guantanamo Bay is illegal. And 2, our other finding is that we torture people in Guantanamo Bay. And if you look at the preamble, they never went to Guantanamo Bay. And they said, we got all our information from released detainees and the lawyers of current detainees. That's real, fair, and balanced. I can tell you what you know in your heart, that we do a very good job. These people down at Gitmo have more due process rights than any enemy combatant in the history of enemy combatants, in the history of military commissions, in the history of war. Is it perfect? No. And so I'm not necessarily disagreeing with the Supreme Court's decision, although it was a bitter 5-4 split. I think they should have a federal judge, but I do disagree with the stats. It's not 2/3, it's the other way around. They've retained 2/3.
It's 34 out of 47 in the federal courts. That was as of 2 weeks ago. Those are the numbers. Actually, could I just agree with 2 things that Professor Adicott has just said? Should our law exempt U.S. citizens from military commissions? No, I don't think it should. If we're going to have military commissions, if we believe that's the right way to go, the one precedent, historical precedent, which isn't a particularly attractive one, the Quirin case in World War II, did allow the trial of a U.S. citizen in a military commission as well. And it seems to me if U.S. citizens are subject to military commissions too, we're not going to be too hasty to allow the use of military commissions. So I agree. I think that we should be more consistent there. Do I think President Obama has been inconsistent? Yes, I do. I would like to see him turn the page on the Bush administration policies about Guantanamo. We had urged him to close Guantanamo, and we were very pleased when, on one of his first days in office, he signed an executive order saying that he would close Guantanamo. It turns out, though, that he's treating Guantanamo as a place rather than as a concept. And as Professor Adicott is saying, and this also I completely agree with, you have to look at the basic premise. If you think that this is just like the war with Nazi Germany, then maybe everything follows from that. But I don't see how you can say that, because everything from that premise starts with, these are people who are members of al-Qaeda. And if you don't know that they're members of al-Qaeda because you haven't yet had a fair process, how can you make that assumption? We are locking up people for 6 or 8 years in Guantanamo, now in Bagram Air Force Base, when we have not yet had a fair process to determine whether they are enemies at all. How is this different from the usual war? Well, in the usual war, the Nazi German soldiers wore uniforms, so we could tell. They admitted being enemy combatants. In the military commission case, the Quirin case, everybody conceded that they were Nazis, so that they were working for the Nazis. There was no doubt about whether or not they were our enemies. The people in Guantanamo, there are great doubts. Are there people there who are guilty as well as innocent? Of course there are. Are those people going to be willing to lie? Of course there are. But there are also innocent people. I think what you're hearing from Professor Adicott and myself is a really good example of the adversary system, because we each have our side. And Professor Adicott's job is to say, well, what if somebody is a terrorist? Do we have a dragnet that's broad enough to make sure that we don't release somebody who can't prove that they're not a terrorist?
Well, I didn't say terrorist. I mean, terrorist is too
Or
broad
al-Qaeda.
a word.
Okay, even a member of enemy
A
combatant.
terrorist, you can't
That's
take
right.
a terrorist and say, we're going to lock you up indefinitely. You cannot do that. We have a lot of terrorists in this
Fair
country.
enough.
Yeah.
Okay, so even if we're talking al-Qaeda, because some of the people in Guantanamo, somebody said that's an al-Qaeda member, but it's total hearsay, or it was based on a coerced confession from Jawad himself, or it was based on coerced confessions from other detainees who say in affidavits, I would have said anything to get them to stop beating me up or waterboarding me. A lot of this abuse did not happen at Guantanamo.
Yeah,
no one was ever waterboarded.
No one was ever waterboarded at Guantanamo.
No, not at
That's
Guantanamo. That's right. But the
false
evidence
statement.
that's being used, no, and I'm not, clearly I'm not saying that. But what happened was that the evidence that's used at Guantanamo is evidence that was obtained from the people who made the statement, who were in some black hole someplace, either the Afghani authorities or a CIA black site. Oh yeah, that's the
I'm not willing
Kazemi
to
and
accept that premise. I mean, no.
well, that's, there are several cases I could cite in the DC
There's a
circuit.
couple of individual cases, yeah, but the vast majority, again, we have picked them up on the battlefield. We have a process to evaluate that. The Combatant Status Review Tribunal, the court struck that down. Now we have federal judges that look that over. I think what's more shocking is the Obama administration's refusal to extend that to their fellow brethren in Bagram.
I agree with that. Again, I think that President Obama should be more consistent. We're just looking from opposite directions. Let me just make one more comment about being dismissive of the idea of torture. Again, the kind of harsh conditions at Guantanamo are not nearly like the kinds of harsh conditions that we've heard about in the CIA black holes all over the world. This is not just listening to Guantanamo detainees who have self-interest. This is the International Committee for the Red Cross. This is the inspectors general of several different agencies. This is the Canadian government or European governments. We have a great deal of proof of torture. So, we can get into that later if you want to, but there is a great deal of proof. There is really no gainsaying right now that people were waterboarded. The 14, quote, high-value detainees who were transferred to Guantanamo from black sites all around the globe, CIA black sites, gave consistent stories to the International Committee for the Red Cross. They never had contact with each other. And the Committee for the Red Cross concluded that there is no way that they could have come up with such similar accounts and details if it hadn't actually happened. There is no way they all could have made up exactly the same detailed stories.